Karen Frankel here to get you all drawing. One of the things that I've come across that people have difficulty with, although they might not know that they're having difficulty with, is drawing trees. And there seems to be your brain, that's what I meant by the knowing brain in the email, your brain wants to tell you how to draw trees, and we end up getting trees that look a bit like lollipop trees. So I'm going to be demonstrating, showing you some major tips for how to not draw those lollipop trees. I've got a bit of a list going, so let's get going and see if my technology is working. I am going to swap over to that, which should be showing you a lovely looking tree at the same time as my drawing demonstration. How's that for technology? Yay, I got it right. Okay, so that tree is there's my camera focusing on my hands. That tree is a pretty typical tree that you can think of in your head what it would look like, and often what happens is we try to draw that tree, and one of the first things we do incorrectly is, even if you are drawing nice foliage and you get all, so it's not just a lollipop, one of the things that people get wrong more frequently than not is they give trees a long trunk, and that is not particularly helpful, and it is not particularly real. So I'm not sure why our brain thinks that way. If you can hear some paper tearing, I'm just getting a little, you can see what I'm doing, I forget about that. Okay, but if we look at that photograph, and I've got a copy of that photograph here, if we actually measure the proportions of the trunk to the top of the foliage, we will see that the trunk to the foliage is from the top of the paper to there, and in fact we could even take the trunk to where the branches come out, which is even shorter. But let's take the long one even, and we compare that to the tree. It's nearly 3 times as big. It's 2.5 times as big from the bottom of the foliage to the top of the foliage, which is way bigger than that little sketch that I did. Not only do we need to look at the proportion of the height of the tree, we also need to look at the proportion of the width of the tree. So I've still got my mark on the piece of paper there. If I check the width of the foliage, 1, you might be surprised, 2, 3. So the width of this tree is even bigger than the height. So that proportion of our lollipop tree is way, way out. And indeed, if we look at the width that I've drawn there, that's a much wider tree than it needs to be for that proportion. So if I take this away now, so I've got room to draw, you've still got that tree there for reference. A more proportionate tree would be that, and remember I said it's about 1/3, so I reckon 1/3 is about there. So my little trunk is going to be like that, and even that might be too wide. And I've just realized that the width also needs to be 3 times, so I haven't even made it wide enough for that particular tree. So your first thing when you're drawing trees, regardless of whether it's from a photograph or from reality, is to check the proportion of the foliage section against the tree trunk. Don't let your head dictate that it's this sort of lollipop. So I guess that might still be called a lollipop, but the proportion of what I've just drawn there is so much better relating to that tree on the side. The next thing I want to tell you, the next tip for drawing trees is to draw the foliage first. So when I am teaching sketching, I always get people to draw very lightly. I'm not even sure if you'll be able to see that pencil mark. It's so light on the page, and that's fine by me. If you draw the general shape of it, that will allow you to put in marks on top of that, and we'll get to mark making in a sec. But that soft circular outline will give us that proportion that we measured with our piece of paper, which was 3.5 that way and 3 that way. I still don't think I've got it wide enough. So depending on the type of tree that you're drawing, obviously that proportion will change. But it's always important, unless it's a tree without foliage or very, very little foliage, put your foliage in, because as you can see in the tree, we cannot actually see all these branches coming through. So the propensity is to draw the branches like this before we do the foliage. And I can hardly see the branches in there, so I'm having to make them up to put them in. Even with trees where you can see more branches, it's still not a good idea to do this. You have a tendency to put in head branches, but more importantly, it looks like, let's see if I can go to, Brian Mitchell joined. Hello Brian, welcome to the video. We've got 5 people on, that's fantastic. And we've got 4 comments. Why can't I see the comments? Ooh, let me just check. Okay, I can't see comments and I'm trying to scroll. So that's, I'm not a happy Jan. I'm scrolling in the wrong place maybe. Okay, we'll have to get to the bottom of that. Sorry, you've been staring at my drawings there. Brian, fabulous. I've seen your comment. Yay, I've just got to learn to scroll. Okay, back to our drawing. One of the most important reason that this doesn't work very well to put your branches in, besides the fact that you can't actually see them, is it looks like we've sliced that tree in half, like that, and we're looking at the middle of the tree and there's foliage just round the back and on the sides. So it does not help us with our three-dimensional view of a tree. And if you were watching my video from a couple of weeks ago, and have a look in the video tab to go and look at my two-dimensional shapes to 3D form, a tree comes out towards us and it goes away from us. So the tree canopy is actually spherical, whereas this makes it look two-dimensional and flat in front. So as in my demonstration of 3D, if we put shading on the one side of the tree, we give the impression that the tree is three-dimensional, which is what we want. Sun coming there, or a low sun. And we get a shadow there as well, and we probably get shadow on the trunk. You can see our lollipop tree is now becoming more three-dimensional. And the foliage exists on top of these branches. But if we try and put foliage on top, we can't help but see those branches coming through. If you put very dense mark making on, then maybe you can get rid of it a little bit, which might help. But we actually would improve things if we do the foliage first. So the next trick, the next thing to mention is the marks that you make to represent a tree. And if you look at our example tree there, you'll see that the marks are, or the foliage of the tree is not little leaves because it's so small that we can't actually see that, but it's also not just smooth and colored in as I've got up here. It's somewhere in between, so we have a texture that indicates foliage, and there's lots of little marks. So if I start again here, I'm going to put some marks down on the dark side of the tree, so you can see that this side is quite in shadow, and I am putting my marks down, and I might leave little patches there so that you can see the sky showing through. And can you see that I'm keeping my pencil on the paper? I'm not lifting it off and going, that was an exaggeration, but I am actually connecting up some of these marks. And as I go towards the light side, I begin to lighten off with my pencil, and I stop putting so many marks in, and I might suggest the edge there. But only put your marks on the shadowed side of the tree. You can color in a little bit over some of these marks to make it appear more dense. Now this is, let's just add our little trunk there, and you can see now that I can add a bit of branch showing through, and I can put some lines through, but I can make the lines or the branches only appear between the foliage. Okay, so that is why we put the foliage on first, so that we've got a sense of this tree being three-dimensional. And we've got our little trunk there. How's that looking? Hopefully not too bad. And while I'm at it, I'm going to put that shadow on. So don't forget to put that shadow. The cast shadow is pretty important in showing us that these trees have 3 dimensions, otherwise they wouldn't be able to cast that shadow. I'm going to make my foliage a bit more dense in that section, so the center of the foliage, and that is my representation more or less of the tree that you can see. Now, important to remember, and this is quite counterintuitive, on the light side of the tree that you can see there, you can actually see the leaves more clearly. And if you're actually looking at a real tree, you will obviously see the leaves on the well-lit side more easily than you will see the foliage on the dark side. However, if we start putting those leaves in on the light side, we will add in a dark tone. And we don't want a dark tone on the lit side. We want to indicate that it's light, and the viewer will still see that there's a little bit of mark making there. It's very soft. We have an advantage with our pencil that we can go quite softly, and that combined with the shadow leading off explains, gives enough information to the viewer that there's lots of light coming in. So please resist the urge to put marks on the light side. Okay, so those are some very, very important first steps to drawing trees. So the first one was proportion. Keep your trunk much, much smaller than you think it is. Look at the proportion of the trunk to the tree so that it comes down to much smaller. Don't forget to check the proportion of the width as well. Don't put your branches in first. Put your foliage in first, and then you can make your branches just peek out of the tree a little bit, and there is a much better tree. Now, sometimes, certainly in my class this week when we've been drawing landscapes, some people have been finding it very difficult to know what kind of mark do you put down for the tree. So I'm going to show you a little trick. I may have shown you before. It's one of my favorite tricks. If you take a photograph and you put it in a document sleeve. I don't have a document sleeve with me at the moment. I didn't get that set up, but it would be too reflecting for us on the camera. But it doesn't matter. I'm going to draw right on my photograph. If I draw on my photograph and I move my pencil around on this page, I will get an idea of the type of mark that this tree has. And then if I replicate that mark on my paper, it's kind of doing that. Okay? Many of my students were doing, I call this loop-de-loop, because their head was saying, we'll fill something in, but I'm not quite sure what to fill in, so I'll just do that. And you can see that that mark does not resemble these marks. So, again, actually see what your pencil does when you are trying to emulate these marks actually on the picture. And in real life, you can pick your pencil up and shut one eye and virtually draw as if you're drawing on a piece of glass between you and the tree. That's a little bit more difficult to demonstrate, but that will give you a very good start to trying to find your mark. So you literally trace over. You could even take a whiteboard marker on your plastic sleeve and draw the marks, and then remove that, and you will see the marks that you've drawn with your whiteboard marker. Okay, so those are the major issues. I'm going to switch to another camera now, or not to another camera, but to another view, which is showing a different photograph. Oh, I'm so pleased with myself that the technology seems to finally be working. There you go, so you can still see my drawing. And now this is a different picture, obviously, that you can see. And you should be able to see that there are a number of trees, obviously. But what I wanted to point out is that even though, so let me get back, okay, there we are. Even though these are long, thin trees, okay, these are from the Borenup forest down south, so not quite as lollipoppy as our first tree, that traditional, what we think of in a tree that's got this almost circular top. Now, clearly these trees are cut off at the top of the picture. However, some of them are complete. Your version that you can see is much better than my printed version there. But you can see there's one tree that goes from there to here. So you can see the top of the tree, and you can see that it is much smaller than these front trees which go right off the page. So when you are drawing trees, don't forget to observe that trees in the distance appear smaller. They're probably exactly the same size, but from a perspective point of view, you can see this tree starting right down here and going up off the page. That tree is probably the same size as that tree. So don't forget to make your trees smaller, and you can see tiny areas in the back where they're going smaller and smaller and smaller. But what I wanted to point out to you in this image is that when I look at these long, tall trees, I go, surely the trunk is not, in this case, smaller than the foliage. And believe it or not, if you start measuring where these trees go, again, you've got a much clearer shot of it than I, but the foliage ends about there on that particular tree, and that's about the size of it, and that's the trunk. So if I measure the trunk You can see it goes one, the foliage is twice as wide, and it's probably, okay, so it's much narrower. I cannot actually see where this tree extends to. Knowing from experience, it is probably wider, because I've drawn these trees quite a lot. So I've looked there to see how wide that canopy is going, and it is closer to 1.5 times as wide. So if we are drawing those eucalypt trees, those long tall eucalypt trees, even that tree has a shorter trunk. So if that's my trunk, I'm going 1, 2, the top of the tree is going to end there, and what did I say, it was 1.5, so if it's 1.5, oh no, I wasn't, 1.5 of my trunk, then it's getting all confused here, 1.5 of that piece of paper. So the ball of my tree, the foliage of my tree, would be something like that. Now, you can see on our eucalypt trees, these are karri trees and tuart trees in the Poranap forest, that they have some canopies. Now it's not, if you close your eyes, it's not that easy to see, but if you half close your eyes, not completely, you will see that that little tree that I'm looking at is made up of shapes of canopy that have got much bigger patches of sky coming through. And what I'd like you to remember is that each of these canopies has the same 3D effect. They're also not sliced in half. So if our sun is coming from there, and generally speaking it is coming from the top to some degree or another, even if it is slightly from the side, your shadow will be on the underside of these canopies, and each separate ball of foliage will have its own section of shadow. So I've just scribbled in that shadow to show you clearly. If we're putting foliage on, we can put the foliage on top of that. Another important thing to remember is if the trees are further away, as I've been pointing out, and they go further and further, we will see less mark making. So we will see less of this character, and the tree will fade into the shape of tone. There's my favorite phrase. So don't go mad on the mark making. And of course there's other random foliage sticking out. I'm not drawing this a perfect tree for you, because this is just the demonstration, and then we can come in with our branches that connect, and obviously we've got branches coming in from the other side of the other trees as well to confuse us, but we can only see that trunk going up through the canopy. So once again, some places we can see a trunk in front of some foliage, but don't forget that there is foliage in front of the tree trunk. Okay, pretty strange eucalypt I've drawn there. One thing I do want to point out as well is that the top of a front canopy, so when I'm drawing in there, this is the edge of an area of foliage that has got light there. That will be shown up, and you can see that in the photograph, by dark behind, and that is the shadow of the canopy that's behind. And then this one will have light on top with shadow behind, and that shadow will be the shadow of the next canopy. Of course, unless there is sky behind, in which case you've got these little gaps letting the light in. I am making this up to a certain extent, but you should be able to see how that tree is formed. So the whole tree comes towards us, but each individual block of foliage comes towards us. So I could even change this tree and lots of, in fact, if we go back to I didn't even finish my sentence. Hello, Michaela. Lovely to see you on board. And hello, Heather. Oh, I think Friday afternoons is a much better idea. Very, very lovely to see you. I'm going to go back to our previous image there. And if we look at the tree there, we have got that idea of that foliage coming forward, and the shadow behind this clump of foliage has got light on it with the shadow behind and the shadow underneath. So you can see, in fact, those clumps that I've been talking about working in this picture. On the subject of smaller trees being further behind, you can actually see in this image, you can see we have got a much smaller tree, not too far away from this one, from the front one. You can see it'll have the same proportion of small trunk to big area of top tree, but look how much smaller the whole thing is than this massive tree. The bottom of that tree, I think there's a mound of sand there covering it, but the bottom of that tree is higher than the bottom of this tree, and the top of that tree is lower than the top of that tree. My eye level would be about here, and so as the trees go further back, that one's getting smaller again, that's behind that one. Those ones are getting smaller as they go further away. They are getting smaller down to the horizon line, which is my eye level, and that's how an avenue of tree works as well. Well, I think that our little demonstration of trees is over. Oh yes, I forgot to say one thing. This is an image of a palm tree that I've just downloaded. Just a small reminder again on our image of a palm tree. When we draw that, is to put a fan with the palm trees going out like that, all from that center bit. But if you actually look at this palm tree, it's so dense there, you can't really see the difference in the fronds, but there are fronds that are sticking out towards you as well, so that also forms a sphere. So all the trees do it, even if it's a Christmas tree and it's conical, that tree comes towards us. So don't forget that they are three-dimensional. And I think that I'm going to call it quits while I haven't mucked anything up. So thanks for joining me. I think this is a much better idea to have it in the afternoon. It's been so great to see you on board. I've actually even managed to see the comments, so I know that I can ask you to give me questions or answer some questions. I'm very, very happy to answer your questions as I see them come through. Just to let you know, there is a little bit of a lag when you are streaming online. So if I sometimes seem a bit bewildered, more bewildered than usual, it's because what I'm seeing on the screen on Facebook is a lagging behind what I'm actually saying at the same time. But I can see everything now. Everything's working. My lights have been delivered, but now I'm waiting for the batteries that fit behind the lights. And then I'll set up a permanent setup for you. I am very excited about how my book is going. I've got fabulous feedback from some of the testers. So I'm going to be finishing off the editing, sending it off to my editor. So that's all going well. So from me to you, until next week, get drawing. Karen Frankel signing off for another Friday. Bye.